I'm Mike Dowdy, and this is the School Leadership Show. Welcome to the only podcast dedicated to helping practicing and aspiring school leaders realize their potential, advance their careers, and achieve work-life balance. The School Leadership Show brings together the greatest minds from inside and outside of education to deliver you the insights and tools you need to succeed in school leadership. This is the show we wish we had 20 years ago. This show is about you. We're here to help you become the best school leader you can be while still having a life outside of work. In this episode, I interview two fantastic attorneys whom I've known for quite some time about special education law. Joyce Berkowitz has a practice representing parents, and Dave Oakes works for the Harris Beach law firm and represents school districts. Our lively discussion centers on what school administrators need to know about special education law. We get into mistakes to avoid, how to stay current on changes to special education law, if that's even possible, when to call the attorneys, what to expect when the attorneys show up, and where the focus of all this work rightfully should be, on children. Joyce and Dave also share insights about their own personal productivity and setting priorities. To reach Joyce, you can Google her name, Joyce B. Berkowitz, or call her. Her number is in the show notes. You can learn more about Dave and his work at Harris Beach's website, harrisbeach.com. Enjoy this interview with Joyce Berkowitz and Dave Oakes. So I'm here with Joyce Berkowitz and Dave Oakes, two attorneys who work in the realm of special education law. If you could just take a second and tell folks a little bit about yourselves and your work, and then we'll get right into it. So Joyce, you want to start?
Sure. I went to law school rather late in life. I was 39 when I went, left my husband and 2 kids and 2 cats at home. And when I graduated law school from the Cleveland Marshall College of Law, I decided to open my practice and focus it in special education law. I've been doing that for, the last 20 years. And what else can I say? I have a husband and still 2 cats and 4 grandsons and having a lot of fun.
So focus on primarily special education law, and typically you're representing families, right?
I am representing exclusively parents of children who have disabilities. Parents are representing the children on the children's behalf. There are plenty of attorneys who will represent school districts. There are a dearth of attorneys who will represent parents.
Okay. Dave Oakes.
Hey, folks.
Okay. There's a lot of attorneys who will represent school districts. One of them's with us here.
There we go. I'm one of them. I represent a great many school districts in Western New York, mostly doing special education work. I've been doing it for a very long time. I also have some experience as being a hearing officer, both in special education and vocational rehabilitation cases. And one of my daughters was a special education student for just a few years when she was very young. So I've also sat at a table as a parent with regard to special education issues.
Okay. And I'll go full disclosure too. I have 2 children with disabilities, and I've been on, I think, all 3 sides of the table: parent, teacher, and administrator. So.
Well, and let me just pipe up here too. And I have 1 child with traumatic brain injury, and I have 4 grandsons, as I mentioned, 3 of whom have IEPs, and 1, I think the jury's out on that one. We'll sort of wait to see what happens. So yeah, I've sat on multiple parts of the process as well.
So this is fantastic. Lots of perspective here. And just, I'll give the disclaimer so you folks don't have to. Nothing we talk about should be constituted as legal advice.
Correct.
Okay, so if you have a legal question, a specific one, go to your attorney.
Correct.
All right.
There you go.
There we go. So I just kind of wanted to, what we're here for, the purpose of the podcast is to provide advice and help and guidance for either aspiring or practicing school administrators. And it's been my experience over the last 20 years in education that Special education is complex, and sometimes it results in legal action. So maybe we could kind of start off by talking about how would each of you characterize the current climate of special ed law, either statewide, nationwide. Where are we? How's that?
Well, I'll start with kind of two prongs at that, if it's all right. And the first one is, as you mentioned, that it's a very complex area. And one of the main problems is we have too many laws that affect special education. Almost everybody knows about the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but there are also implications from something called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and also something called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I would have to say that causes actually a fair amount of confusion and maybe mixed expectations on people, because they all have somewhat different definitions, somewhat different requirements, and it's sometimes hard to figure out how they all fit together. That said, kind of looking at the other kind of pragmatic prong, I think overall the climate between school districts and parents and students is very good. That most parents are interested in hearing what school districts' thoughts and what their expertise leads to think about in terms of the education for their children. And the school districts that I deal with are all very interested to hear what parents have to say and their input. That said, it doesn't mean everybody always disagrees or always agrees, but I think overall there is a good sense of working together.
I think that, responding to what David has said, I would not necessarily agree that there are too many laws. I would agree that it can be confusing, particularly for parents and even school administrators, and definitely for teachers, because there is perhaps a lack of in-depth training on what these laws mean, how they apply, why they were enacted in the first place, all the various procedures that are attached to them, etc. And that's why your school district's attorney is very important to you, as is a good advocate to help parents out in understanding these things. I practice exclusively in New York State. That's where I am. I'm frequently all over the state, mostly Western New York and then also Northern New York. What I understand from watching what is happening in terms of cases coming out, downstate seems to be much more litigious than upstate. And as for the rest of the country, quite a lot of case law comes out of the Midwest and also the two coasts, California and New York. Otherwise, things seem to be fairly calm. I'm not sure that we can draw any conclusions from that.
Now, accepting that children are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, I'm just going to get right into it here. How are administrators supposed to balance the needs of students, or in some cases the wishes of the parents, and with the interests of the taxpayers? And I know that's anathema to talk about money and bring money up in this context, but that's the school district's job is to be stewards of taxpayer dollars. So,
well, I'll take this one first, David.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, it's a pay me now or pay me later situation. Taxpayers are parents, and parents are taxpayers within your district. And the goal of the district, I would imagine, across the country, is that the students eventually grow up and become taxpayers. So, unless the student's education is appropriate, unless it is vibrant and robust and meets all of their needs across domains, you're not going to end up with students who can come back and be productive members of the society. and parenthetically taxpayers. How do you balance those? There is the short-term view in terms of what the budget is, and then there is the long-term view of what it is that the community sees itself as becoming and remaining over time. Both of those things need to be taken into account.
Well, let me just add a couple of other views on that. And the first is what you kind of were alluding to, Mike, which is actually legally dollars are not an issue. Legally, school districts are not allowed to be making decisions about what is an appropriate education based on dollars. That said, if you think it through, it still is a consideration because the standard for special education is a free, appropriate public education. And appropriate is a spectrum. There are a lot of things that might be appropriate. And what your reference to the standard there about Cadillac versus Chevy levels of education.
What case was that? I can't remember.
It was a case quite a long time ago. I believe it was a district court, federal district court case. I don't remember the name of the case. It's so forever ago.
Is that still a standard though? That's kind of
yeah, pretty
applied?
much. Okay. You're entitled to what is appropriate.
Right, and again, I mean, in terms of pragmatically balancing things, I think all it really means is that school districts don't have to do what somebody thinks is the very best. And in terms of what plays out in reality, I think is really kind of a tangent to that, which is where the biggest disagreements come about in my experience is that a parent goes to an outside evaluator or provider or specialist in their view, who makes a recommendation and the parent concludes that is the only way that my child can be appropriately served. And that gets people into lots of tangles.
And that's a hard one too. I'm a parent. I want what's best for my kid. We all do. So, I mean, how do you help people wrap their heads around the difference between ideal and appropriate?
Well, I think...
Well, that's one of the conversations that I have regularly with parents, the whole concept of what is quote-unquote too much and what is quote-unquote not enough, and how do you figure that out? I think one of the ways you figure that out is, first of all, when everybody agrees that there may be different points of view, but are willing to have an adult, respectful conversation about what it is that the information is telling everybody, how it is coming into the discussion, and what the different perspectives are and why the perspectives are different. David knows that one of the things that I like to look at is actual data. That's just a personal quirk on my part. I don't really much care what folks' anecdotal notes happen to be. I want to see the cold, hard, objective facts, usually. That's not everybody's way of doing things. In looking at the difference between an independent evaluator's results and a school district's evaluator's results, the issue for me is not who is biased to give somebody a particular conclusion, but how well the particular evaluation was accomplished, how well the report was written, and I don't necessarily mean in terms of its editing for misspellings. I mean in terms of the actual information provided. And does that fit with folks' observations both in the classroom, at home, and in the community? And then when we have that information and can sit down as adults and talk about it, then we can come to some decisions about what is actually appropriate.
Well, following up on that, I think it's also important to keep in mind that everybody really in this has the same goal, has the same stake, which is the success of the student. And I would say again, I'm going to talk a little bit like a lawyer here, since I am a lawyer.
That's our lawyers. That's
Go
why
for
you're
it.
There we go. That technically the standard for what a school district has to do is pretty low, but I don't know any school districts that actually do that. And again, let me just be a lawyer and a historian a little bit here. The legal standard about all of this is from a case decided by the United States Supreme Court, the Rowley case, which set a pretty low standard. And one of the things that people don't remember is that factually it said that a school district did not have to provide an interpreter for a deaf child who could only understand half of what was going on in the classroom without it. I don't know of any school district that adopts that point of view. And so again,
especially since the National Association for the Deaf is the oldest civil rights organization in the country. Okay,
yes,
so go ahead. Sorry.
Exactly.
Trivia.
But again, I just want to, I guess, take us back to the point that appropriate is a spectrum, and what Joyce has said about the fact that people need to be open to hearing lots of different input and then making some decision about, well, what seems to be a reasonable approach for this particular child.
Right. And it does get to be dicey, and that, frankly, is why there are attorneys to help people through the process, first and foremost, without litigating it and in trying to problem solve. And I think David and I, over the last 20 years, have really attempted to do that more times than not. I don't know that I wholeheartedly agree with David's statement that all of the school districts are looking to provide more than what is a basic minimum. I will say, in my experience, that the school districts, and I pretty much see David on a regular basis, we're all pretty much in the same school districts most of the time, are not purposefully not providing what, in my professional opinion, would be the minimum that a youngster needs after looking at all the information. I don't think it's a purposeful thing. I think it's a perspective thing, which is different. And I do try to help the parents understand that this is not a personal vendetta against themselves or their child when a district comes and makes a particular recommendation. So
and I've been in the room with the two of you, and
yes, you have.
Just like I am right now. And one of the things I think that I not struggled with, but the first time when you're a school administrator and you're in the room with the attorneys, that it raises your level of concern, especially if you're young and new to the profession and that kind of stuff. So, and Joyce, you talked about it, and I think you nailed it. The lawyers' jobs are to help get to some sort of resolution before you have to go to court. So what would you tell, from your perspectives, what advice would you give to those folks who, there might be a principal or a director or something, and they just got the word that they have to go to this meeting and the family's bringing their attorney and the school attorney's going to be there? What would you tell them?
Well, first, I guess first, just because of who I am, be not afraid. The attorneys are there generally to help out. Now, you may hear through the grapevine that there are certain attorneys who are extremely aggressive, who tend to be quite litigious. Don't be afraid anyway. Bring your attorney in. Keep the conversation respectful. Take breaks if you need to have breaks, so that the feeling in the room is businesslike, and go from there. There's no need to be defensive. There's no need to be afraid. Don't worry that you're going to say the wrong thing, because odds are whatever it is that you're thinking is in an email somewhere anyhow. So, somebody's going to come across it at some point in time. And it is what it is. So that's where I would go.
Well, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that really the job of the attorneys there is to help the conversation be focused. And no offense to teachers, and I'm married to one, but teachers tend to talk a lot and wander around sort of tangential issues and not stay focused on the fact that there has to be some decision making. And in my view, that's what the job of the attorneys there is, to help make sure everybody stays focused on the fact that we have a lot of information to look at, but ultimately we have to make some good decisions here.
And even if there's a disagreement about whether the decision is good, because oftentimes there is a disagreement about that, it is a school district's responsibility to make that decision, period, end of story. And then parents have the right to go and do whatever it is that they have the right to do, mediation, impartial hearing, complaint to the state, whatever it is. Ask for another meeting, perhaps bring in more information, depending on the circumstances.
So kind of following along that same line of reasoning a little bit, if you were going to give advice to new or practicing administrators around how to avoid mistakes, or what mistakes have you seen people make, from the school administrator perspective, and how can they avoid them, I guess?
Well, from my perspective, there's probably three main things that special ed teachers and administrators and providers should think about. And one is, it's almost impossible to have too much communication with parents. And when you don't have communication with parents, particularly the more difficult time a student might be having in school, parents make all sorts of assumptions, frequently negative. And you've got to have the communication with them so the parents know the actual information and don't make negative assumptions.
Well, in the absence of information, you make it up, which is...
Right. And if you're worried, you tend to make up negative things. Secondly, everybody in school districts is working very hard, and there are lots of time constraints on them. But one of the things that blows a relationship between a school district and parents is not getting things done timely. And it's a little thing, but if there is going to be an issue about timeliness or delay, sending a parent an email or a phone call or some sort of message saying, look, I know we talked about getting this done by Monday, but it's not going to be able to be possible to do that. We'll try to get it done by the end of the week or by next week. And I think that buys a lot of good faith between both sides. And the other thing that I sometimes surprise my school district clients about is I tell them, don't be happy or don't you make assumptions that everything is good if the parent isn't ranting and raving but is fairly quiet. You need to proactively find out what the parent really is thinking. And just the fact that a meeting seemed to you to go kind of okay, there wasn't any big blow up or any big push, that doesn't mean that's where the parent is. Again, it's back to the communication issue.
And I think just to follow up on that, I think one of the things too that we forget as school leaders and people who attend meetings in schools all the time, we're used to it. We know what meetings are like. We know how it feels. We know how things go. If you've got a parent coming in, this might be the one of the 3 meetings they attend at the school that entire school year. So I kind of liken it to when I go to the doctor and I know what I want to talk about when I go in, but I'm in there and I forget. Because you're just in that setting that you're not really used to being in, and it takes time to process that information. And I think that's why I found a lot of times parents might seem okay in the meeting, but then they have time to process, and they're like, wait a second, and then they have questions.
Well, also, as you said, the parents aren't, most parents don't have a ton of experience with these types of meetings. Some parents are pretty young, and they're afraid to speak up. And so they might not say anything at the meeting and go home and say, geez, this was terrible what the school district was saying. And again, if you haven't probed and established some good communication, you, the school district, have a real misimpression as to where things are.
All of what you're talking about has to do with forming a collaborative, trusting relationship between school and families. and that's extremely important. I think one of the things that trips up teachers and administrators is saying to parents, the law says. First of all, you don't know what the law says. We don't know what the law says. I mean, we do, but we don't. We always have to go back and redo research on what we think is, the standard, what we can, and then we go find a case that turns things on its head. So, no, you don't really know what the law says. You really should contact your school district's attorney if you have any questions, any doubts, and for sure not telling the parents that this is what the law says. The other part is I hear from a fair number of parents that they and or their children were not treated with dignity and respect. That somehow or another I walk in the room and all of a sudden everybody's minding their P's and Q's. Failing to treat students and parents with dignity and respect is likely to get a return in kind from the parents, number one. And number two, administrators who default to a staff member's position or version of events can be quite challenging for parents and students to understand and accept, and quite frankly, may be in error. So defaulting to that position and not checking your assumptions from the get-go is problematic.
So keeping an open mind, checking your assumptions.
Absolutely.
And communication, a lot to think about. Now, you mentioned, we don't necessarily know the law, like incarnate. You have to go back and research each time something new comes up. What suggestions would you have for administrators to stay as current as they can on special education law and kind of trends in the field? What would you suggest?
Well, I'll start out by being very negative and cynical and saying it's impossible for school people to do that.
I would agree, actually.
Given that,
well, yeah, because that's good for business for you guys.
Well, beyond that, I mean, they have so much to do.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. But given that, I mean, a couple of things I think that make sense, and then I'm going to tell you one that doesn't make sense. It's just the lawyer's dream. There is a publication called The Special Educator that has a fair amount of information, at least about recent happenings in special education. That said, it gives me pause because frequently the information in there doesn't give the whole picture, and so you got to be a little bit careful of what you're taking from that. The other thing, and Joyce actually already mentioned it, is you shouldn't be hesitant about calling your school attorney because it is a very complicated area. And the nonsensical issue that I want to throw out there is in my dreams I have that special education teachers and administrators once every 2 months spend 45 minutes or so reading the special education regulations. But I know there's just not time for that. But the point about that is that we've talked about several times here. There are a lot of rules. There are a lot of complicated rules.
There are a lot of rules. There are complicated rules. There are resources online. I do believe that each state has its own regulatory agency and likely publishes a variety of guidance documents and decisions, etc. And there are likely opportunities to contact the state's education department, and there's probably somebody there to help weed things out. But really, and it may sound funny from somebody who represents parents only, but calling your school district's attorney is your first best bet. There's an old saying called penny wise, pound foolish. If you don't check with your attorney first and spend a few pennies, you're going to spend a lot of money later when that person has to represent you and get you out of a problem.
That could have been avoided up front.
Right.
So I mentioned in the beginning that this podcast is about giving practical advice to school leaders. I think we've done a great job of that today. I want to take it away from the law a little bit. You're both successful and busy professionals. Do you have any personal productivity tips that you could share with folks?
Have you seen our offices?
I do have a podcast with an office organizer that you might want to check out.
I don't know about productivity tips. To me, what unfortunately actually is more important is that people in schools have to, like we do too, and it makes life difficult, you have to reprioritize every day. You can't make a to-do list of issues and just go down them in order, because different issues, both legally and pragmatically in terms of what's going on with kids, jump up and down the list of how urgent they are.
Yeah, but I agree with David. There are 24 hours in a day. We all get to figure out how to use each and every one of those hours. Having a plan is wonderful, and then life happens. You know, the minute you have a beautiful plan, some crisis comes up either in your personal life or in your professional life, and forget about it. Your plan is done. Flexibility helps. Prioritizing, I agree, helps.
I'm not sure it's exactly productivity, but going back to something else that we talked a little bit about, I think one thing that is critically important is while you're reprioritizing, you can't forget about the things you've committed to. And again, one of the biggest things that puts parents off is to arrive into a situation where there was an agreement to do an evaluation by such and such a date, or to do an observation by such and such a date. And not that it's just a few days late, but it's sometimes weeks or even months, and you just can't let that happen. At least you can't let that happen without keeping the parent up to date and saying, look, we have to reschedule.
Well, to piggyback on that, if at all possible, certain tasks can be delegated. Most school administrators have secretarial help, office administrative help, that kind of thing. Failing that, I regularly get emails from directors of special education, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight. We're never turning it off, which is bad for our families, but at least things are happening in a timely manner, and we are in a service industry. We have to take care of those details.
All right, so I want to be sensitive to your time. That was a quick half hour. So where can people learn more about you and your work? Any place you would point them to? Websites? You probably don't want to put your email out there, but...
You know, I don't have a website. I'm one of those strange people who's not exactly technologically averse, but don't happen to have a website. Folks who want to know more can just Google my name, Joyce B. Berkowitz, Berkowitz. You might come up with something interesting. You can call my office, 585-421-9094, and see what happens.
Okay.
And I work with the Harris Beach Law Firm. We do have a website. There is some information on that, but again, I think if you actually have a question, you need to ask someone specifically. Parents generally will either call someone like Joyce, or they will ask the school district their complicated question, and hopefully the school district will give me a call and we'll get back to them.
All right, well, Joyce Berkowitz and Dave Oakes, thank you so much for your time today. This was a great conversation. We may have to do a part 2 at some point.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders by school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. And now it's time to rate the podcast in iTunes and leave a comment. No, really, it's time to do it. So when you're done here, go right to iTunes, rate the podcast, leave a comment. Thanks.